Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcabbage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast, and we have another guest today. Her name is Natasha Trenev, and she is the founder and president of Natren, which is a probiotics company. So we're going to talk about probiotics. We're going to talk about gut health, chronic illness. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. She's touted as the mother of probiotics. We'll find out what the heck that even means and how that came about. And we'll get some backstory into her and her family and how they got involved in the world of probiotics and how probiotics may potentially have a role in helping people improve their health and their well-being. So, Natasha, welcome to the Thyroid Answers podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulously, and it's a favorite topic of mine. I've been in this field for 56 years. And I actually introduced the term probiotics to the dietary supplement field. It existed before in the animal husbandry field, but I said, wow, if people are making money selling their animals and they're using these probiotics for the animals, why aren't human beings using this every day to maximize their health, energy level, and everything that functions in their body?
Yeah, so we'll get into what probiotics are, because I think people, they hear probiotic and they think they know what it is, but maybe they don't. But how did you get involved in the world of probiotics to begin with?
Well, I had different plans, but my family has been in the fermented food business from Macedonia for 750 years. It comes through my father. My grandfather was the largest exporter of yogurt and feta cheese out of the Balkans. Before and during World War I. My father was one who accepted the position, and he moved to Belgrade, and he was so phenomenal in the products that he produced and introduced that the King of Yugoslavia granted him an official license to be the official food supplier to the King of Yugoslavia. And then that spread to other royal families throughout Europe, including the British royal family.
So they were supplying them with what? With yogurts?
With yogurts, yes.
And those yogurts were probably much different than what you buy at the grocery store today.
Yes, because not only did they taste delicious, but they actually had live cultures that were started with live cultures every time a batch was made. There was very strict controls, and we were only packaging it in glass in the beginning, and then we got pushed into plastics, which I wasn't too happy about. But the tradition continued because in the early 1970s, when I ran the company, we were sending 2 cases of 16-ounce jars of our royal yogurt to the British family.
So let's talk about, we got yogurt. Your family started developing yogurt, and people started liking it. You started giving it out a bit. What is in this yogurt that people wanted it? Was it just the wonderful taste?
No, actually, yogurt is, there's a difference between probiotic bacteria and probiotic bacteria that are used as starter cultures. That's one of the ignorances we need to straighten out, because starter cultures will actually ferment a food. Fermenting means that it'll break down the proteins, the carbohydrates, so that it's easier for the bacteria to utilize, and in addition for the human host. So in other words, just to give you one example, folic acid availability in yogurt is increased by 500% if it were just to take it from plain ordinary milk. So the yogurt bacteria, which is Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus, those are the 2 classic organisms recognized by the FDA and the USDA as being the only starter cultures to make a product that you can call yogurt. This is very important because people started throwing in other organisms in there, and they're really not culturing the product. They're just thrown in there in hope that they survive and do some benefit to the host. So okay. Let me stop me if there's something I say that you don't understand.
No, I understand that part. So, but we also want to make sure we get this to individual people so they understand. So the benefit of potentially taking something like a yogurt that has a whole bunch of bacteria in it
Mhm.
is that some people believe that the bacteria in the yogurt, maybe the yogurt to buy at the grocery store, but let's talk about the yogurt that your family started with.
Mhm.
The bacteria in that yogurt, was that helping change the bacterial balance and that's what was providing benefit? Or was the bacteria in that yogurt actually helping break food down? And so the food was more usable by the
Mhm.
bacteria that maybe was in somebody's GI tract.
No, it's twofold. And the reason I say that is because the more food is digestible, the less irritated your immune system is, and the better it is to fuel the body. The last thing you want to do is just feed the body. You want to do something to fuel the body because that's the optimal way of replacing your entire body every year, which we can get into it a little bit later. But the important thing is that before we became such a polluted society, the beneficial bacteria found in yogurt were enough to help stimulate a positive balance in the microbiota found in our microbiome, which is in our 27 feet of GI tract. Okay, so now what you have is this bacteria was studied at the turn of the century by a very famous doctor who was a fellow of Louis Pasteur from the Pasteur Institute. His name was Dr. Ilya Mechnikov, and he published the first book about the health of these bacteria for human hosts called the prolongation of life. And his claim was that the reason one of the starter culture bacteria in yogurt is called Lactobacillus bulgaricus is because he named it after the famous Bulgarians who he found lived past 100 years, were healthy and working in the fields, and died in their sleep. And he said, wow, this is what we should all aspire to live a healthy life, not to end up in a nursing home, in so many words, trying to live a vegetable life. But he said, this is the prolongation of life. This bacteria eliminates toxins from the body. That was his whole premise of longevity. And that book is like the hallmark of the understanding of this beneficial bacteria and the whole concept of probiotics that came later.
Okay, so early on, it was thought that when they were looking at people that were eating this yogurt that had this bacteria in it, these people were healthier than the general population.
Yeah, they were healthy, vibrant, they were active, they could father children, they could have children later in life. They in general enjoyed a much more healthier, rewarding lifestyle and life because of their habits. They would eat at least the natural style Bulgarian yogurt 2 or 3 times a day. And by the way, which is horrifying to me, that in America, the two staples in a healthy Eastern European diet were bread and yogurt. And that's the two things in our society we tell people not to eat.
Well, do you think that's because people aren't? You think it's because the yogurt that's available for people today isn't the same yogurt that maybe people benefited from before? And maybe the bread that we eat today is not the same bread that was being
Yeah.
made,
Well,
decades ago. So maybe the food that people are telling people not to eat Wonder White bread, maybe that's a good idea to not eat that
Well,
bread.
there's a number of reasons. Obviously, the milk in our country has been radically changed. The cows are not healthy. The hormones we feed the cows, the feed we feed the cows, and so it affects the milk. And I believe that the allergies in this country is what we've done to the animals. It's not the animal product itself, but what we've done to the animals that's made the animal product not healthy for us. Because in Eastern Europe and Switzerland and all of Europe, dairy products are consumed, and they should be consumed because they are the basis of health for those civilizations that grew up with them. In other words, fermented foods goes back to the classic Greek Empire. The Romans had it. They all had a form of fermented food in their diet. So let's, drop that. And then the issue with the bread is not that the bread is so much of a problem, because you go to France and Italy and somewhere in Europe, you don't have the same problem with the bread. What happened in America is that we took our scientific ingenuity and ruined some of these products because first we hybridized wheat in this country and then we GMO'd it. And the reason it becomes a problem, very simply, is because immune cells line the intestinal wall along with the bacteria. And the bacteria are protein in matter, okay? And so any protein that wants to go across the intestinal wall into the bloodstream, if it's not recognized by the immune cells as a food or something beneficial, you get a reaction because it's assuming it's something harmful. And because we've hybridized and GMO'd our wheat, the gluten, which is the protein part of the wheat, has become that trigger that triggers the immune system. Say, wait a minute, that doesn't fit my retinal recognition of this product. So I'm going to have, an alert. I'm going to alarm because this might harm the body once it gets into the bloodstream. Does that make sense?
Well, no, I think I agree with part of what you'd say, but isn't it the proper process when we eat food is we eat food, proteins, we break those proteins down to peptides. Peptides are broken down into amino acids, and it's the amino acids that we should be absorbing across the GI barrier. I think it's less we shouldn't be absorbing big proteins across the GI barrier unless there's more permeability there.
No, we shouldn't. And that's dual process. You're correct. There is something about that protein that it's been changed, that whatever byproducts are made from that protein is upsetting to the immune cells that line the intestinal lining.
Well, and I've heard, you hear lots of stories. I don't know which one is currently accurate, but the other thought process that maybe the reason why the bread that we eat here in the States is more problematic than it is somewhere else is maybe less about the hybridization and maybe more about the chemicals that we use on our crops, like things like Roundup, which is an antibiotic, which then damages
the glyphosate. Yes.
That then changes the human biome, which creates chaos in the GI tract. And that's maybe the bigger factor, is that we're constantly taking an antibiotic that we're told it doesn't affect us because we don't have a Shikimate pathway, so therefore it can't harm us. But we do have a whole bunch of bacteria in the GI tract that does have a Shikimate pathway, and it can disrupt the gut flora and potentially create issues.
That's true too. I'm always told to keep it simple because people can take a lot of information at one point, but you're right. It is a complicated, multifaceted issue. But I'm just trying to simple it down for people who don't understand. So the problem with gluten is that it's become a problem and it triggers sensitivity because of what we've done to the wheat. Whether it's spraying it with a pesticide that's a potent antibiotic, or by hybridizing it, changing the protein structure that's part of the wheat. And also, don't forget that gluten is one of the most popular meat extenders used by fast food operators. You get they use it continually so that they can keep their meat products cheap.
Well, yeah, I mean, meat glue, which unfortunately is used in the industry, and people don't realize even that wonderful piece of filet you may have gotten at the restaurant maybe have a bunch of gluten holding scraps of filet together. So gluten is in a lot of different foods that we eat. And so, yes, it can be potentially problematic. For a lot of people, it's way more problematic, I think, than it has ever been. But I think I agree there's various potential reasons why. But let's talk about, go ahead.
No,
let's talk about,
all right.
So let's talk about the probiotics. And we talk about the yogurt, and from the yogurt came the idea that, hey, these bacteria that are in the yogurt can be beneficial to livestock. You're saying, hey, we found that we can see this happening. Why not use some of these same bacteria and provide them to humans beyond maybe just our Bulgarian yogurt? And you're saying this became the beginning of probiotics. So somebody could then, instead of just consuming the yogurt, they could take the bacteria in a capsule as a probiotic. Is that the gist
It's
of the
somewhat
story?
correct, but the starter culture used in yogurt did not become the official probiotic, because the official probiotic that we introduced was the Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is not part of the yogurt starter culture. It is a separate bacteria, been used prophylactically in the Balkans, maybe not known by the name acidophilus, but that was the main organism that was used to culture a whey type substance that people drank for gastrointestinal problems. And this acidophilus was the predominant beneficial bacteria before the word probiotics even made its way into the popular vernacular. So the acidophilus has been in written literature for over 100 years. I was the first one to get my microfiche data. At that time, it was the University of Leningrad the Academy of Sciences in Leningrad, I beg your pardon, and worked with a fellow there and translated the first articles from Russian into English in the early 1970s regarding the health benefits of this acidophilus, which was known in Eastern Europe and somewhat known in the United States, because there was good publications from certain universities, but not publicly known by the general public. In fact, I was one of the consultants when sweet acidophilus was introduced to the public by a very prominent researcher in North Carolina by the name of Marvin Speck. And so it was a great concept, because what they did, it took cell concentrates and floated it in a cold milk so that it wouldn't start the fermentation process. The problem was the FDA and the ignorance of the public. They really couldn't put enough of this organism in to have an impact on the health of the GI tract, because people would not pay that much for a milk with a shot of really good bacteria. So they had to dilute it to the point where you'd have to drink a gallon of milk to get any kind of effect. So it was really a tragedy. But again, it was the commercial aspect trying to fight regulators and public ignorance to get something beneficial to the public that would have definitely help their overall health.
Okay, so let me back you up, because I think we're kind of getting a little bit off track. We want to kind of keep a certain kind of
Okay.
path here. So we started the story with, we had this yogurt that had bacteria in it, and that bacteria, somebody found that consuming this yogurt with this bacteria was beneficial for the GI tract, right? So you've got this fermented product, got bacteria in it, and you said, hey, the bacteria in this fermented product were not to be what we would want maybe as the probiotic, but this was in the yogurt. It's been as the kind of the starter in the yogurt. It was beneficial. So prior, I mean, were people eating this yogurt in the US and other countries for thousands of years? I mean, this couldn't have just started in Bulgaria or Yugoslavia or wherever it got started. People have been doing this for thousands of years in all kinds of different cultures, right?
Yeah, it goes back to Mesopotamia. It goes back to Cleopatra. It goes back to the classical Greeks. Fermented foods have been passed down for centuries from one culture to another. You may use different starter cultures. That's what's confusing to people. They may have used different starter cultures to ferment their food or break it down, versus what we discovered later, what had to be cultured separately, because it was not a good bacteria to culture food, because it would break it down too much and make it sour. So the acidophilus became an adjunct to the yogurt for people who had digestive ills. At that time, people didn't understand which bacteria was in which food. So what I've done to make it simple for people, the fermented foods became a functional food versus a probiotic organism, which is a specific bacterium which likes to live either in the small or large intestine of the human gastrointestinal tract, or likes to live in the other microbiomes of the body, the skin, the sex organs, wherever bacteria are found in the body. In fact, the bacteria are even found in the neurons in your brain. Had many arguments with people for the last 40 years, whether or not there's a blood-brain barrier that keeps bacteria out. Luckily, my views are the ones that are accepted today. But let's put it this way. Understanding bacteria is rocket science. You have to understand the history. You have to understand which bacteria developed in which venue to be introduced to the human body, and which ones are necessary and able to function to help the human host allow the body to heal itself and not interfere with each other. That's the whole premise that we need here, because for thousands of years, the greatest philosophers said that all disease begins in the gut, in the GI tract, whatever name you want to name it. It's there because everything that comes from the outside world goes through that GI tract in order to fuel our bodies. And there's a whole bunch of defenses of what you don't want from what comes on the outside, on the inside, to disrupt the health of the body. It's as simple as that.
Okay. So why do we need a probiotic? Why don't we just eat fermented foods?
Because it's no longer enough. You just mentioned one thing. We're ingesting antibiotics prophylactically. We've disrupted the complete function of the microbiome so that fermented foods are not providing enough support to keep those beneficial bacteria, which we need in much larger numbers to keep our bodies healthy and to allow the body to keep healing itself, because every minute you lose 10 million cells. Those cells need proteins to be rebuilt. If you make cheap proteins, you're going to get sick. It's as simple as that. So we need to have the right bacteria mixture in our small intestine, in our large intestine, for the absorption of fuel to be made through the intestinal wall, and for the correct expulsion of toxins in a timely fashion from our body.
Okay. So you're saying the fermented food is good, right? We can eat lots of fermented
Yes.
food. That's probably good. It should be something that's part of somebody's general health and well-being.
Right.
Correct? Okay.
Correct.
And then now we've got these things called probiotics, which in 2022 were estimated to be a $58 billion industry and thought to get to probably somewhere in the $85 billion industry by 2027. And so if we think about that, that's a massive growth in this industry over the last, let's say, 40 years. And yet we're not healthier than we were 40 years ago. We're probably sicker than we've ever been, and we're consuming way more probiotic than we ever have. So why are all these probiotics that we're taking, if they're so beneficial to the GI tract and human health, why are they not working?
Because there's no standards, and people are absolutely ignorant of microbiology, and even more so about probiotics. The corruption in the health food industry is severe. I've been a member of many organizations. I've sat on standards committees, and I can tell you still, unfortunately today, 80% of all the dietary supplements across the board do not meet their label declaration. That is the tragedy, and that we really don't have formulators. I'm sorry, but if you're a doctor, it doesn't qualify you to be a formulator, because they don't teach formulation and fermentation in medical school. They teach you how to read literature. That's a different set of skills. And so what we have is a complete mishmash of people just throwing bacteria together, slapping a label on, which doesn't meet any labeling standard, but getting away with it because they've destroyed any industry who wanted to implement a true label program. And so anything goes. And I think that's done by design. I think that because when people take a good dietary supplement, like a good probiotic, and they engage in good dietary habits and they exercise, I think people can and will regain their health. And I have 40 years of proof to show it, because the retention of my customers, 80%. People who start our probiotics have taken them for decades, and it's not a sales pitch. I'm still working because I am deeply concerned about the 80% of people who are chronically ill in this country. which is unheard of. And with the trillions of dollars, our healthcare budget is $4.3 trillion. It's inexcusable that we have 80% of these people chronically ill in this country, and you have autism rates skyrocketing, because I work with the autism community. They're now 1 in 30 and going to 1 in 2 by 2030. And I just talked to somebody 2 weeks ago who told me that if it reaches 1 in 2, we're going to have to spend $17 trillion to treat those children.
Oh, yeah. We have a health care crisis going on, but we also are spending tons of money on drugs. We're spending tons of money on antibiotics, and we're spending tons of money on supplementation, and specifically we're talking about probiotics. So how is somebody supposed to know? Because my listeners are physicians and their patients as well. How is somebody supposed to know what a good probiotic is? Because you could say, well, I've been doing it 40 years. I'm the mother of probiotics. And somebody might say, listen, that's just marketing too. There's another guy over here who says he's the king of probiotics and he's been in it for 30. Here's another company that's just come out. So how does somebody look at a product and know that a probiotic is good probiotic, not good probiotic, that what's in the bottle is accurate, right? Appropriate to labeling? How do they know by looking at a bottle that it's enough probiotic, enough bacteria in there, too little bacteria, or the bacteria that are in the bottle together may not even play well together? How is somebody supposed to know that?
Well, look, okay. The industry chose me to write the probiotic labeling standard, and that's provable. That was read into congressional record. So obviously the industry considers me somebody that knows something. I've worked with the best doctors, the best scientists in the world, and I have formulated products using what I call core probiotic bacteria that are found in specific regions in our body. And I have spared no expense to make sure that I have delivery systems that make sure that those bacteria will survive storage, shipping, handling, stomach acid, and bile. And if you do those 5 things, the products will work. The problem is nobody follows those 5 points, and they always try to find a marketing position to say, while theirs is okay to be put out on a shelf, and then tell you that it's no problem to ship it without thermally controlled packaging, without ever telling you that 9 months of the year in this country, if it's 80 degrees outside, it's 120 degrees in the UPS truck. That's the problem. The problem is that everybody's using a contract manufacturer to formulate and make their product, and they're telling the consumer whatever they want to hear. One thing I can assure you, that bacteria are a lot smarter than we are. They don't perform because we want them to perform. They're the opportunists of all categories. They only perform if they're stimulated to perform and that they have an incentive to perform. If they're not, and they can't survive, because your stomach acid was designed to kill bacteria. Okay? It's designed to
I want to get there, but I want to try and get the answer to the question, because somebody is listening to this and there's like, okay, so the only person who's making a bacteria that I know is going to work, right, is going to be your company. That can't be that you're the only person who's making that. So
No.
when they look at a bottle of probiotic, how does somebody, what are the things that are important when they're looking at a bottle of probiotic that they can look at and say, this probiotic is probably a good one, this one is probably not? There should be some key clues when they look at a bottle that might help them understand what a good probiotic might be and what not a good probiotic product might be.
Okay, let's look at the labeling standard. You have to list accurately the bacteria name, and for each bacteria you have in the bottle, there has to be a specific potency guaranteed through the expiry date. If you can't guarantee the specific potency of that bacteria, why are you ingesting it? Number one. If the bacteria are allowed to touch inside a capsule, they're not dormant. They are competing with each other inside of that capsule, which weakens their ability to function in your GI tract. What is it in the bacteria's essence that protects it from stomach acid? Telling me that the bacteria is somewhat resistant to stomach acid is somewhat good, but I've developed a oil matrix system that has been proven by a very prominent European institute that shows survival of my 3 bacteria in my flagship product survives stomach acid as low as 1.8 pH for well over an hour. Okay, that's proof. If it survives stomach acid and it's not damaged or stressed out, it will perform. Secondly, I have been licensed by the University of Nebraska to represent their licensed findings on super strains of bacteria. I've worked with the foremost researcher in bifidobacteria, Dr. Jeremiah Rasic, for almost 20 years. I work with the head of many culture banks around the world, including the one in Germany. I even have the opportunity to get organisms from a Japanese bank. I've worked with the head of molecular identification services in England, which is their version of the CDC. I've worked with the best researchers in the world, and whatever information I've made is what I've used to make the product stable and to make the product functional, because I don't make any other vitamins. I only make probiotics, period. And that's, I'm saying, I've dedicated my life. We've built the state-of-the-art pharmaceutical plant. All I know is that I stand behind what I make and what I say. And I can tell you, I've never had any complaints filed against me in 40 years. I don't even have complaints with the Better Business Bureau. That's 40 years of an impeccable record. That's what I can stand behind and tell you my products work.
Right. But I don't want this to be a sales pitch for your product. What I want to, what I'm trying to get you to help people understand is what they can look at, whether they pick up your probiotic or they don't pick up your probiotic. What are the things that they should look on the label to determine, is this a good probiotic to potentially use, or is this a not so good probiotic?
I just told you that it has to have each microorganism listed and a specific potency for each microorganism through the expiry date. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but are they going to see that on a label?
Yes, they should. They see it on my label. They have to see it on the label. Otherwise, the label is not in compliance with the label standards that were read into congressional record.
Okay, so they should see somewhere on there that it's going to last, guaranteed to last through the expiration date. That should be on the bottle.
But what they do, now listen, this is the difference. They give you a total count. Of all the bacteria that throw in that product, they give you a total count. I give you that total count, but I break it down by bacteria. I say this one I guarantee for 20 billion. This one I guarantee for 5 billion. Each independently through an expiry date clearly printed on the label.
Right. So for the listener, if you're picking up a probiotic and it's Jane's special probiotic blend, and it just says it says lactobacillus, acidophilus, bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, but it doesn't tell you how many colony forming units are in there.
Yep.
Is that a flag that it may not be the best? It should tell you how much of each one is in there, right?
That's right. That's correct.
So somebody might assume that more is better when they look at the label. Is that accurate?
No.
Why not? In America, we love more is better. So why is that not good?
Because survival is everything. If the bacteria are damaged and don't survive, they're not going to perform.
Okay. So, and then you're also saying that there should be some mechanism to help protect the bacteria to get past saliva, stomach acid, bile, digestive
Right.
enzymes, right? Because
Right.
the whole purpose of part of the purpose of saliva, stomach
Mhm.
acid, bile acids, and digestive enzymes is not just to break down the food, but also to sterilize that food coming in for a large part. Is
Yeah.
that
Well,
accurate?
yeah. Yeah, they try to sterilize, but trust me, nothing is sterile that reaches your gut. You try to make it as sterile as possible.
Right. So the bacteria is trying to kill off a lot of the stuff that's coming in as it
That's
moves
right.
its way down the GI tract. So some organism that you take that shouldn't be in the GI tract doesn't colonize the GI tract. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't always work out because people get different types of GI crises, um, gut
Mhm.
infections. So it can happen, but there, there should be something to help protect the bacteria, right?
Absolutely. And why I say this is because, again, stomach acid was designed to digest proteins and to kill bacteria,
Mhm.
period. The problem is that some manufacturers, in order to get some kind of reaction or to treat symptoms, have entered the field of introducing soil bacteria and calling them probiotics. I'm vehemently opposed to this because soil bacteria are what we call shape shifters. They change forms. And many times you're lucky if this spore doesn't sporulate inside the GI tract because you have no idea what it's going to do when it wants to compete with territorial gain. Okay. So using soil bacteria, yes, it's used sometimes in India, but it's used, by a culture that has somehow adopted to this use. We are not adopted to using soil bacteria because I'll give you one example. Your mother hopefully taught you to wash your fruits and vegetables. She didn't tell you not to wash them. We wash them now because of pesticides, but even if they were grown in your home, in your farm, you still wash the vegetables before you ate them. It's because you wanted to wash the stuff off the vegetables and off the fruits before you put it into your mouth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then you'll hear the other side of that, like, hey, you get your hands dirty, get your body into the dirt, get the soil, get the bacteria, and that's a big part of the problem, right? So is that the message those that promote soil-based bacteria are promoting? Is that just a myth that, hey, it's good to get some dirt in our system because the dirt has some bacteria in it?
Well, yeah, and that bacteria is sometimes used to make the most potent antibiotics and drugs. As a matter of fact, vancomycin was developed by somebody taking a teaspoon of dirt from Borneo and finding what was in that dirt that eventually produced the drug called vancomycin.
Okay. So I mean, but there's also cultures around the world. I was in Peru and they're eating directly out of the ground many times. They're taking their foods and cooking in the ground. And I guess you could say the heat's going to kill all the bacteria, and maybe that's why
Mhm.
they do it naturally. But they're
Yep.
not washing a lot of their food, but maybe they're using heat as their way to try and kill off a lot of that
Oh
dirt-based
yeah,
bacteria.
absolutely. If absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's something that they've learned from observing their environment and that's passed on from generation to generation. It's about minimizing the exposure of the bacteria you ingest.
Okay. So besides the name of the colony forming units, and it needs to have something, um, have some help, something to help protect it. And most of the probiotics that maybe you're going to buy at the local grocery store probably doesn't have a something to help the delivery of that probiotic. Um,
I can safely say most of them don't, and it's not a sales pitch. Believe me, I would welcome people doing a better job because obviously I don't have an intent in servicing large amounts of people, nor am I here to promote myself or my company. I'm here because I'm deeply concerned about the amount of young people who are chronically ill and they're subjected to, these TikTok commercials and somebody with a flashy body telling them that this is the latest quick fix for their really serious problems.
Yeah. Oh, I want to jump to that in a second. I want to touch base on maybe one more thing to look on the bottle of a probiotic. Is it important that somebody sees something called like the strain type? Because people look at a bottle and they go, oh, they know Lactobacillus acidophilus, right? They know that. Maybe they've heard of bifidobacteria. But is all Lactobacillus acidophilus the same?
No.
Is all bifido the same? So if they look at a bottle, should it have some type of an identification number? Should it say more than Lactobacillus acidophilus?
Yeah.
Should it have a number or some type of identifier to a strain type?
Yeah, but even if they identify the strain, doesn't guarantee that they're actually putting that in the product. But it should have an identification, and they should tell you again how much of that strain will survive a printed expiry date, because that at least puts a legal burden on them not to deceive. So it's the same thing of telling me that all tall men will make great basketball players. They have a potential, but they don't necessarily mean that they're going to make a great basketball player. That's the same thing. In other words, you want the strain because that strain has been trained to perform under certain conditions and deliver certain results.
Right. So for the listener, when you're looking at the bottle, you want to make sure that it tells you how many colony forming units. There's some guarantee that it's going to make it to the expiration date, that a certain amount is going to make it to the expiration date. And that should be on the label. It should have some type of technology to get it there. And it should give you a strain number as well. Those are like some of the key factors that are going to help. And what you were saying about tall men make basketball players, saying that you're taking Lactobacillus acidophilus is saying you married Joe Smith. There's probably a million Joe Smiths in the US. Which one did you marry? Joe, Joe Smith, right? Yeah. Right. But which one? And that makes all the difference, right? Because one Joe Smith could be an axe murderer. The other one could be the best guy in the world. And you want the one that's the best guy in the world. So those are some of the things to look at when we're thinking about probiotics. Now, when we talk about why somebody might need to take a probiotic, we have this issue. We have chronic health issues in this country. You're worried about kids. You're worried about autism. I think a lot of us in this industry are. And I think the reason that you'll probably say that we're struggling with so much chronic illness and chronic disease is the diet we eat, the lifestyle that we lead. Is that what you would say is that, hey, the diet and the lifestyle we consume today, the drugs, the chemicals, everything else is changing the human biome, and that's leading to chronic illness?
That's right. It's not only in the food, it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in everything that we ingest orally or through our nose that we inhale. We're being bombarded from every angle.
So if that's the case, how does somebody know what probiotic they need?
Well, maybe it's, they trust somebody who's spent 56 years in the field. And I've had many opportunities to make cheaper products, lesser products, but I care so much that I've chosen the bacteria that have evolved with Homo sapiens. A Lactobacillus acidophilus that wants to live in the small intestine because it's a facultative anaerobe, and an obligate anaerobe such as a bifidobacteria. But by the way, I was the first one to introduce bifidobacteria in a product for human consumption in 1984 in the United States. Nobody knew what the heck I was talking about. And I just went on German and Japanese studies that showed this is one of the most important beneficial bacteria for human health, because it loves to live in the large intestine, which the colon is part of the large intestine, because it likes to live in an area without oxygen. And it's really the most important bacteria because it really controls the waste and disposal system from our body. It takes the burden off the liver and makes sure that the body is only fueled and not poisoned by the poisons and the toxins being reabsorbed through the large intestine.
Okay, so let me back you up a little bit. So you talked about Lactobacillus acidophilus, one,
Right.
and you talked about Bifidobacterium, right? As
And I
being
use
two
the
that,
one is Bifidobacterium bifidum is the one I've used for the
okay.
last 40 years.
And so is there a specific type of Lactobacillus acidophilus that's better than another?
Yes, I've been using the DDS1 for 40 years, and I was the one licensed by the University of Nebraska to represent them in selling this. Other people have used DDS1. I grow it according to the research data that shows how it needs to be grown and stabilized. And I've used it for 40 years, and I like that organism because it's been found in healthy vaginal flora and urinary tract. And yes, they sometimes now change the name of the species, but I say, look, this is the one that's been consistently in the culture for decades, and we know it's safe and effective. And
Okay.
that's why I stick to it.
So Lactobacillus acidophilus, DDS1. This is
Or, or NAS is my other name because I named it NAS, which means Natren acidophilus strain, because I took the DDS1 and grew it in a specific vegan culture medium because a lot of people don't want to eat dairy-based products, even though I've explained to them thousands of times that the milk is not there for them. It's for the bacteria. That's where they're called lactobacilli, which means milk bacteria. But, the other messaging is too strong. So I've had to develop a vegan powder. So when you change culture mediums, you do alter the strain, but my NAS is the same as the DDS1, proven genetically and with the byproducts that it produces.
So is this a standard type of bacteria that would normally be in anyone's GI tract?
Yes, it's, the one that's been, like I said, in the literature and found in Homo sapiens for the last 100+ years.
Okay. So Lactobacillus DDS1 or Lactobacillus acidophilus NAS,
Yes.
this is something that would normally be in the gut, but because of our diet, because of our lifestyle, because of the stressors that we're under, we might, is it fair to say that we have a die off of a large portion of these, or they just don't, it just does not grow well in the average human today with
Yeah,
chronic illness?
both are true. Both are true. We're not good, houses for them. We're not good areas for them to proliferate. And all bacteria, their objective is to proliferate their own kind. So we don't become a great place for them to hang out. It's the same thing with the bifidobacteria. We're not only deficient in what I call the lactobacillus in the small intestine, we're deficient of bifidobacteria. And I've added a third bacteria, the lactobacillus bulgaricus, which is part of the yogurt starter culture, because that was studied for decades in Bulgaria for many properties, including anti-cancerous properties, anti-tumor properties, great immunostimulating properties. So these are the bacteria I chose that had, people from the culture study these bacteria, prove their scientific value, and that's the one I want to culture and introduce into the human being, because I know that's been there. First of all, it's never going to be hostile to us, and it only provides benefits.
Okay. So what does the Lactobacillus acidophilus DDS1 or NAS inside the human GI tract? What is it that we need to feed it from a food perspective so that the bacteria can live and grow on its own, and maybe somebody doesn't have to take as much probiotic on an ongoing basis?
Well, a diet, what we call a probiotic diet, onions, legumes, certain things in our diet are natural foods. I don't like using something that people call a prebiotic, because a prebiotic is an indigestible carbohydrate or a sugar, which means it becomes direct feed for the bacteria. And the assumption has always been made that it's only going to feed the beneficial bacteria. But with the large number of disturbances we have, I think it can feed yeast, candida. That's definitely been proven. And other undesirable bacteria. They say, oh, only the good bacteria will feed. And look, we increase the counts, but That's not a hard and proven scientific fact. Yes, you can find larger colonies, but just because you're expelling larger colonies of something doesn't mean that necessarily you've increased them inside your GI tract.
Okay. So there are plants, I'm guessing. You said onions and you said some other vegetables. What were some of the other vegetables that you said?
Legumes,
So
like beans, yeah,
yeah,
beans.
so legumes, beans, onions. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but these are often foods that people tell you that if you have health issues, you shouldn't be eating
Yeah,
these
because
things
you can't digest them. You
because
can't
they're
digest well.
problematic.
Yep, they're
So
problematic. So
is
what
it,
you need,
eh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
What I'm saying is that we're getting to the point where we won't be able to eat anything.
Mhm.
That's the point that I'm saying that, yes, look, I can eat a whole onion sitting down, eat it, from a bowl because that's what I've grown up with. Now, if you've lost the ability to eat onions and you've eaten refined foods, then you would go to something like more of a steamed, a rice with extra virgin olive oil. You can even go into a sweet potato. You can go into those what I call healthy carbs and not overdo it. That makes sense.
So is it your thought process that the foods that a lot of people complain are problematic, garlic and onions and
Mhm.
higher FODMAP foods potentially, foods with lectins, things that are removed on an anti-inflammatory diet. The reason many of these healthy foods that are removed on those things, legumes being one of them, peppers, maybe tomatoes, the reason these things are maybe more problematic is because over the years, we've lost the bacteria some of the beneficial bacteria in the gut that doesn't allow us to break those foods down appropriately. And that's why they may cause us more indigestion than it is maybe more of the toxins that are in the food that are creating all the problems.
Right. I think we all get what I call 5-minute advice. Let me tell you, historically, onions have been a great anti-inflammatory food. If you go back to the history of health foods, you find that in almost every culture that's healthy is you find onions and garlic.
Yeah. Listen, I agree with you. I don't think I don't think eating plant-based foods for the most part is the thing that created most of the issue. Now, I could maybe argue that, hey, we force ripen foods and some foods, and that may be problematic, and how we raise them may be
Mhm.
problematic. But when we're telling people garlic's bad for you, onions are bad for you, all these natural foods are bad for you. I don't know that that's the case. I do, I do consider the fact, and I would agree with you that for a lot of people, the food is not necessarily the problem. Their ability to break it down and digest it becomes the problem, um, and that's why
Yep.
it may
Yep.
create more problems.
Yep. And as a matter of fact, I've listened to all these gurus that talk about the microlectins, and I said, listen, there are a lot of cultures, even in the blue zone, that eat these microlectins, and people don't have a problem. Maybe because they haven't damaged their microbiome, and that's why they're able to eat these foods without these problems. I'm not saying that if you have this problem, you should eliminate these foods, but also listen to this. How are you going to get all this nutrition? And I worry about all the young women who have become vegan, and now there's now a push telling people that maybe that's not so healthy, that meats and things that we've had in our diet traditionally help to offset some of the toxins that are caused by the plant-based foods when you don't eat meats. So there's so much conflicting information that really I think a person needs to decide for themselves what they feel good eating. Are they eating natural versions of that food? Are they eating the highly processed version of that food? And go back to basics. And I tell people the elimination diet has been around for more than 50 years. It's very simple. You don't have to pay hundreds of dollars. If you feel something is causing you problems, eliminate it from your diet for 72 hours. Try a little bit later, like after 72 hours, try a little bit of it in your diet and see if it causes a reaction. And many times these people don't even chew their foods. So I say, do you ever sit down and make sure that each bite is chewed 10 times at least, and that you turn off your devices and you're not shoveling food in your mouth like it's a computer, and that your body is not a trash can, that you need to treat it with love and respect, and that you need to enjoy your food, maybe get together with a friend, listen to some music, put away your devices, and maybe you'll start digesting better.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about that in my book. One of the first things to do if you want to be healthier is you got to put your body in a position to eat. Too many of us are eating on the run, running around, or we're in a more sympathetic state and a lower parasympathetic state. And if we're really going to produce stomach acid and saliva and digestive enzymes and healthy bile, we have to put our body in the best state to be able to produce those things. If we're running around, if we're in chaos and crisis and the body's in distress mode, it's focused on protection. It's not focused on digestion. So I agree
and
there.
Also, just to quote, my gurus that I listen to, Dr. Dispenza and Dr. Bruce Lipton, they tell you if you're under stress, all your blood flow goes to your extremities. You need blood flow to digest your food. If your blood's rushing to your extremities, how do you expect to have good digestion?
Oh yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I listened to Bruce early on, and Joe, I think, has taken a lot of Bruce's early work and now use science to kind of validate how our mind, our mindset, our thoughts, our actions can change our health, change our gut biome, change what goes on in the GI tract. So it's a really important thing. The real or perceived stress changes our physiology, and that's not broken, it's adaptive, right? So if I'm telling myself I'm in danger, and your body starts increasing your blood pressure and increasing inflammatory chemicals, that's not broken physiology.
No,
that's adaptive. That's like, whoa, I got to protect. And
it means you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and you better run because you're not going to be around much longer.
Yeah. So we talked about the lactobacillus acidophilus. This is something that's typically in the GI tract. There's certain, and we talked about the BDS1 or the NAS. We'll talk about the lactobacillus. Everybody, obviously, when you're looking at things, everybody's promoting lactobacillus acidophilus. And the reason I really kind of pushed hard on this question was I wanted to make sure that we got the answer I was looking for. Everybody's promoting lactobacillus acidophilus in everything. And what I wanted her to say was that, hey, these things not every lactobacillus acidophilus is the same. They don't have the same benefit. There's certain types that may be more beneficial. But one of the questions, especially regarding this, is too much lactobacillus acidophilus that isn't necessarily the type that's in the GI tract. Is there a downside to taking it?
Well, in 40 years, I haven't seen a downside. Never seen anybody complain about it. I've never seen
any type of lactobacillus acidophilus, like not your strains that you're potentially using.
Not from acidophilus. I've seen it from some problematic results from other species of lactobacilli, which may inhibit bifidobacteria, which I've decided not to use in my products. But not from lactobacillus acidophilus. Every one of my bacteria are compatible with each other and have been tested numerous times for their compatibility, and they don't annihilate each other when they're put in close quarters with each other.
Right. So, but for the person who's picking up their bottle or getting their yogurt and it says lactobacillus acidophilus, and they're taking one that's just a general over-the-counter lactobacillus acidophilus, is there any potential? Can they take too much of that and crowd out other beneficial types of lactobacillus acidophilus?
No, I'll tell you first thing, please do not think you're getting any acidophilus in a yogurt. There's been numerous studies that show that lactobacillus acidophilus will die in a yogurt. It's not an environment that it likes. And there's competition between the other two bacteria in that particular medium. So forget that. Or anybody who puts any other bacteria in the yogurt, you're not going to get great quantities of that bacteria. You might as well stop eating the yogurt with the fruit. That's why finally I got so sick and tired of this that I've introduced my family's yogurt starter and I sell it. I don't make much money on it, and it's usually a lost leader for me. But I just went crazy with people. Then I said, look, here's the yogurt starter. Here's the way my family used to make it. I made a video. It's not that hard. You just use the best quality milk, and I want whole milk. You preheat the milk, you precondition it, you cool it down. Usually when you heat the milk, you do it in a double boiler, and I use stainless steel or glass. And, then we inoculate it. We put it in a dark place for 5 to 8 hours, and you have wonderful natural yogurt with nothing in it except the milk and the culture.
Well, that's part of the problem with I think you mentioned this before, with a lot of the milk that we have today. What we're doing is we're killing all the bacteria that's in the milk, which probably makes it harder for a lot of, I don't know how it is in Europe, but in the US here, it probably makes it harder for people to digest, because the bacteria that comes in the milk is probably what's helping break down and digest that milk.
Somewhat, but be careful, because I've been around with raw milk since Altadena Dairy in the late 1960s. And here's what it is, so that I can go straight on this topic. Raw milk is great if you have a cow in Switzerland that's your family cow. You milk it in the morning, you bring that milk in, and the family drinks it. It's not okay anywhere else because pathogens are airborne. I've had numerous times where I've had to defend Altadena Dairy before the State Food and Drug, and could not prove that that milk could not get contaminated with airborne salmonella. And that was the biggest problem. And their stables were so clean, you could literally eat off the floor. The cow udders were wiped with iodine. These people went to enormous, anything that money could buy to make sure that those stalls were clean and they wouldn't contaminate the milk, but they couldn't stop anything airborne. And every once in a while, we had a nasty case, and that's why it became, illegal. And as a matter of fact, in the state of Utah, which concerned me the most, we had an infestation of Campylobacter in raw milk, and that got my attention because Campylobacter is one of those really nasty bacteria. They had a whole shutdown of the country of Peru. I don't know if you're aware of. They had an outbreak of Campylobacter jejuni, which will cause the immune system sometimes to paralyze the whole body in a defensive move. And you just pray that the immune system lets it go and you don't remain paralyzed.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Bifidobacterium bifidum that we started to talk about. Where do we typically find this, and why do we think we need more as a probiotic?
Well, okay. First of all, the first science I got was from Japan and Germany that said this was the most important bacteria for human health. And I introduced it because the large intestine is extremely important to human health. And I've also had the pleasure to work with Dr. Sabine Hassan, who's using my products for her protocols. And she claims that people who are vaccine injured and who have had long haul COVID have destroyed their bifidobacteria in their large intestine. And she's very concerned. She uses multiple therapies to try to restore the bifidobacteria to the large intestine, because her contention is that you destroy the bifidobacteria, you don't have an immunity. And so it is a very important bacterium. And I'm glad that for so many years, I fought people. They didn't even know what the heck I was talking about. Even 15 years ago, they didn't know what the heck I was talking about. But bifidobacteria has become a very important part of the human health. And it's probably very important not to get colon cancer, because now they're admitting that having the wrong bacteria in your large intestine and colon can lead to colon cancer. And I'm worried about all these colon cancers that are manifesting in young people, even in their 20s and their 30s. The numbers are just escalating. And I'm very concerned.
So for the listener, the bifidobacteria, they do play a big role in the generation of things called short-chain fatty acids. And it's those short-chain fatty acids that then help regulate the T cell system, especially the Treg. So they also help maintain the tight junctions in the GI tract. So if somebody's told you have leaky gut and you have lots of food sensitivities and food intolerances, if you reduce the bifidobacteria, you potentially reduce the short chain fatty acid production, especially
Yeah.
things like butyrate. And that can cause, once the immune
Okay.
system gets turned on, it could be harder for it to calm back
Don't
down.
forget that the bifidobacteria themselves don't produce the butyrate. They entice another group of bacteria to produce the butyrate. It's called the buddy system.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you have the right bacteria that evolved with Homo sapiens, they will stimulate the right bacteria to produce the right substances because their objective is to keep you healthy because they like your environment and that's where they can thrive. So it's a buddy system.
So this is one of the really important things about probiotics. It's not just, oh, if it's low, let me put something else in, which we see today. The thing that I think what Natasha's trying to help you understand is that some of the bacteria that we use as probiotics. So I think what she's trying to say is that she's trying to match what's always been in the human system to begin with. And these are ones that we can grow outside of the human body and then put back in, and they play a role in overall health in what they do. But what they also do is attract their friends and crowd out some of their enemies. So if
That's
you
right.
have abnormal growth of bacteria in the GI tract, you can crowd out some of the good bacteria. But if you have more of the bifido or the lactobacillus in there, they can attract their friends that help make some of these things like butyrate and some of the other things that are really important for optimal health and function.
Right.
And you can be
Right.
healthier
And then I
as
just
a
want to
result.
say two things. Butyrates are not stable compounds and should not be ingested because they're destroyed by stomach acid. So right now I'm looking into a few compounds, but that's a problem with some of these dietary supplements. They try to sell you stuff that's very unstable and probably won't reach its destination. That's my number one concern. The number two concern is that people don't understand that you have a dynamic ecosystem. Why? Because 40% of your dry weight fecal matter is bacteria, is microbes. So that ecosystem is changing. Yes, there's a stable ecosystem, but the more stress and the more compounds we expose it to, it becomes destabilized. And my theory is that because of this destabilization, we are now getting a host of diseases because we've destroyed that internal ecosystem, which is the foundation of our health. That's why we have to supplement. It's no longer there because the environment has been totally changed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So let me ask you this question: is right now, Akkermansia muciniphila is a bacteria in the GI tract, and if it's too much, there's some science and it may be an issue, but if too little, it could be an issue. And right now Akkermansia muciniphila is now a probiotic. Is that good? Is it not good? I know a lot of people are rushing out to get it.
Yeah, Akkermansia is a bacteria which we still don't understand. It seems to have an effect on regulating glucose production. And what I think is important to note here, again, one of the things that I found out in working with Dr. Hassan, that the lactobacillus that I use in my Healthy Trinity do stimulate the growth of Akkermansia. And that I thought, again, that's the buddy system, because she was concerned that you don't grow too much because it's also present in Parkinson's patients. So her contention is, and I'm still thinking about this one, that, Parkinson patients have an accelerated growth of this Akkermansia population. And she's worried that that's not the cause. And I said, Sabine, I agree with you, but also don't forget, just because something is present doesn't mean that it's the cause of.
Yeah, sometimes correlation or causation, right? Is that
Yes.
so? I think sometimes people assume that, oh, if it's there, it created the problem. That would be like, then you'd have to say all firemen cause fires.
That's right.
Right?
So I'm very hesitant to what I call designer organism to be supplemented, because we just don't have enough and know enough about the safety record. And I know that type 2 diabetes is a problem. It's growing. I think it's this instability of glucose and our glycemic factor going up and down like crazy. I think that has to do with the growth of yeast organisms in our body. Candida is one of them that's now been identified with being the cause of Alzheimer's. That's a topic for another long broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's why it's called type 3 diabetes, by the way, Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, well, we definitely know or believe that the gut flora plays a major role in blood glucose regulation,
Yes.
GLP-1 release. And for the listeners, I've talked about GLP-1. It's like this is the darling drug that's out right now, these GLP-1 agonists. If you need those drugs or you benefit from those drugs, it's a good chance that you have some dysfunction in the GI tract to begin with, potentially some dysbiosis going on, because the healthy bacteria in the gut does play a normal role in first phase insulin response, which I've done a couple podcasts on and some other posts on. So it's really important to have a healthy microbiome. It's not just the gut bacteria. It's about blood glucose regulation. It's about hormone regulation. It's about neurotransmitter regulation. It's about every aspect. I know in traditional medicine, we often break things up into separate systems. The gut's not related to the brain. The brain is different than the heart, right? But the gut biome does influence every system. And since this is the Thyroid Answers podcast, it influences and has the potential risk of being one of the factors that can trigger thyroiditis. So it's really important that we have a healthy gut biome.
Oh, in
I want
fact,
to touch.
every sex hormone can be affected by the microbiome. One of the key factors of the healthy microbiome, it can recycle hormones and lessen the troubles we have with menopause and the recycling of these hormones, because as you age, you excrete more hormones and you produce less. So if you can help with the excretion process to lessen that, you probably will lessen the problems you experience when your hormone production starts slipping.
Yeah. And we've probably talked about that on other podcasts when we talked about the sex hormones, and we talked about something called beta glucuronidase, which can be generated by the bacteria. For some people, they need beta glucuronidase to help recycle those hormones and get them back in the system because the body needs more. And for other people, too much beta glucuronidase, it can be problematic because now you recycle too much hormone potentially back into the system.
Well, it depends also on your diet. And just to say, off on the tangent, I was one of the first ones to protest on the amount of soy milk people were drinking in the 80s and the 90s. And I got pushed back like crazy. I said, look at the culture. What are they consuming and why? You cannot just make an assumption and start consuming this like crazy because you think it's good for you.
Well, we can do it. It doesn't mean it's good for us, right? But everybody jumps to conclusions all the time. But let's talk about, you brought up yeast. So let's touch on yeast a little bit before we get finished. I want to talk about two organisms, yeast and parasites, because they're both the rage. If somebody believes they have a yeast overgrowth, especially in the GI tract, but it's usually in other tissues as well, how could they use probiotic bacteria to potentially help regulate that?
Well, I know I can tell you only about my Lactobacillus acidophilus because it was tested about 20 years ago in a Yale nursing school study on HIV positive women who had vaginal yeast overgrowth. And it performed as well as metronidazole, who's also an antifungal agent, but it does have some side effects on the people using it. So that was one proof that that it does handle yeast, whether vaginally or intestinally, because it will produce minute amounts of hydrogen peroxide to compete with the yeast. So it is a good competitor against the yeast because antimicrobials do not affect yeast, because yeast is not something that's affected by antibiotics, as we all know. And antifungal agents do a tremendous damage to our liver. So we have to be very careful. People who take antifungals do have to protect their liver. So that's why I'm saying that, sometimes my healthy trinity is too strong. So I tell them start with the megadophilus, start in small doses, go on a low carbohydrate diet, possibly take an antifungal that's not going to damage your liver, and, start slowly. because it's very difficult to get over candidiasis. It's not an easy process at all.
What about parasites?
Parasites. That was early part in my career. I worked with a very famous, what are they called? Tropical disease doctors, Dr. Bueno out of Colombia. And that's when I learned that parasites are 500 times bigger than bacteria. And Giardia is one of the most common ones. And in that era was when we found out that every fresh waterway in the United States was contaminated with this Giardia. And how I found out is that a young woman who went hiking in Colorado, put her can of soda to cool in the stream, did not drink the steam water. Some of the droplets that came on top of her soda can, that's all she had to swallow. And she ended being helicoptered out of there fighting for her life. So parasites are extremely, extremely difficult to get out of the system. And, the medications that we have available are at most 60% effective. And whether this is true or not, because I don't claim to be a parasite expert, but as Dr. Bueno said to me many years ago, that there's only two species of Artemisia that are effective. One was from Colombia and the other was from China. So all I know is that you need a very good herbal supplement that actually has the correct species to try to fight that Giardia. And you have to take really mountainfuls of this probiotic, both in the powder and the capsule form, to help the body fight it, because it is extremely detrimental to the body.
Got it. Okay. So I want to finish up with this. We're an hour and a half flew right by, right? You didn't even know it was that late already. But let's talk about if you had to give the listeners 3 key things to consider to improve their health and their well-being. Maybe you might be, maybe you'll surprise me, but what are the 3 key things that somebody can start doing today to start improving their health and their well-being and their biome?
Thank you for that. That's my tripod of health. I tell them a precision probiotic supplementation program that you're serious about. And then you need a low carb diet, which I provide free of charge on my site. You don't have to buy a thing. It was developed by me and a medical doctor who also had a degree in microbiology. I just want you to be healthy, so you don't have to pay me a dime for that. It's very easy to follow. And a walking program developed by a nationally recognized fitness expert, again, free on my chart. So that's the tripod. And I'm going to add a 4th thing, meditation. Get your mind and your spirit, your heart, brain coherence, get yourself calm, learn how to speak to your higher self, feed your body, fuel your body, don't just feed it, and learn to respect your diet and your exercise. And I don't mean running around, being a marathon runner. I'm just saying healthy walking, and walk with a friend, get into a better lifestyle. My tripod of health with the addition of the meditation. Got it.
All right. And your company is, tell everybody what the name of the company is.
Natren, Natren.com. And we still have live people that you can call, and they can help you customize a program for your health. You can go to the site and get the free low carb diet or the walking program. That's my gift to you. You don't have to pay me a dime.
And so you also said that you authored some books. What are the names of the books, and where might somebody find the books?
Well, the books are on my site. My book is still in circulation, even though it was published years ago. It's called Nature's Internal Healers, Probiotics, Nature's Internal Healers. And it's on my website. You can call in, and my people give the book out if you buy some product from us. I felt, it's been in the market for a long time, and it still has unique information, believe it or not. And I'm happy to educate people. I'm just here really to finish my job, and that is to help bring our health back to a normal phase.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I think we got some new information out to the listeners. If there's any final points you want to make, we'll get them out. Other than that, I'll let you enjoy your day and your evening and holiday season.
Thank you. All I have to say that you're in charge. You are in charge of your health and you are the technology. Your body is a magnificent machine. It has all the tools to heal itself. You just have to make sure you give it the tools.
Perfect. All right. Well, everybody, this is another episode of Thyroid Answers podcast. I think we didn't get too heavy, but we got a little heavy. So you may want to listen to that a little bit, maybe one more time, share it with friends and family, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes. Natasha, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And it was great having a conversation with you. Maybe we'll look forward to talking together again sometime in the future. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate your podcast and the ability to speak.